Good day, folks, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with I, your host, the Anorak. As I've mentioned last time, I want to do something a little different for an episode or two. I do still enjoy reviewing many albums and records, and I still intend to do that, but I also wish to expand a bit and tackle other stuff as well. And I always wanted to dedicate an episode or two to making a kind of top 10 list. So I came up with a good subject. My favourite comic book characters, particularly from the big two, Marvel and DC. First, we're going to talk about my favourites from the Marvel Universe, from the popular and iconic to the obscure and underrated, be they superhero, supervillain, or even just a supporting civilian character, and maybe a certain iteration or incarnation of such each. So, without much to say, let's just jump into it, shall we? This is my top 10 favourite Marvel characters. Kicking off that list at number 10 would be the Black Cat. Kicking off with a little bit of a prowl, no less. With one of Spider-Man's lesser known rogues, and on and off again love interests as well. Initially created by Marv Wolfman, Dave Cockrum, and Keith Pollard as a potential rival to Spider-Woman, Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, had her debut appearance in the 194th issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, all the way back in around 1979, where she temporarily thwarted the friendly web-slinger with her powers of bad luck, and from there on, she would become an anti-heroine of sorts and even get in a solo series or two. Now, some people out there are likely to brush off or even accuse this character of being a blatant carbon copy / rip-off of DC's Catwoman, both of them being cat-themed thieves and burglars, wearing mostly black tight leather, and having romantic / sexual subtext with their respective male heroes, Spider-Man and Batman. However, Wolfman himself had admitted that such to not really be the case exactly. At least not deliberately. The actual inspiration behind the Black Cat character came from a Tex Avery MGM cartoon short from 1949 called Bad Luck Blackie. Now, watching the animated short online, one may not find any explicit similarities or connections between the two, aside from both being based around the old superstition that crossing with a black cat will bring bad luck. Now, my favourite iteration of the character would be from the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series, where she was voiced by Tricia Helfer, which many people may know for playing number 6 from the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, whilst I know her as Veronica Dare from Halo 3 ODST. And yes, I'm a big Halo fan. If the beloved anti-heroine eventually gets a chance again with that silver and black film or TV series with the Silver Sable, be it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Sony's own Marvel Universe, they'd better get back Felicity Jones to reprise the role. And give her a platinum blonde wig. At number 9 is Jim Hammond, aka the original Human Torch. Nope, not Johnny Storm of the Fantastic Four, but yep, the very first superhero of the Marvel Universe. Created by Carl Bogos for Marvel Comics issue 1 all the way back in 1939, the first Human Torch is, ironically, not exactly human, but rather an android built by scientist Professor Phineas Horton. No doubt related to a Ferb Horton, and no doubt after hatching an egg and hearing The Who. I mean, The Who are a great band after all. Who happens to have similar powers to his later, more well-known namesake, eventually becoming a main feature of Marvel's mystery comics and even spawning his own solo series, being one of the first superhero characters to get such. He would gain a sidekick in the form of Toro, being the first ever comic book superhero crossover with the Submariner himself, Namor, who also debuted in the very first issue of Marvel Comics, and would even form a superhero team during the Second World War known as the Invaders, alongside Namor, Toro, Captain America, and even Bucky Barnes. Aside from a little little brief blink and miss cameo in the MCU installment Captain America: The First Avenger, our synthetic man, Jim Hammond, has rarely made any appearance in any media outside of comics, like video games or animated TV shows, which is a bit of a shame, really. Even when Namor is pretty much confirmed to appear in Black Panther 2: Wakanda Forever, and we're slated to see a new Fantastic Four film in a few years, no doubt will be featuring the Johnny Storm Human Torch. So in a way, Jim Hammond, the original Human Torch, is, or should be, Marvel's own Superman. He appeared in the first pages of the very first issue, even on the cover itself, no less. His origins, his very story pretty much set off the Marvel Universe itself. And he did set off something an example for many other superheroes to come. Captain America, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, the Avengers, etc. All of them owe it to that humanoid robot who could just burst into flames just from being exposed to oxygen. Plus, like Superman's creators, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, and the Human Torch's own creator, Carl Burgos, also happened to be Jewish and have served in the US military back in the Second World War. That's double awesome. Number 8 would be Monica Rambeau, the second Captain Marvel. I know many people may prefer Mar-Vell or Carol Danvers as the Cap, but honestly, out of the various individuals in Marvel's lineup to have the mantle, I think Monica is the most interesting, with maybe Mar-Vell's kids Genus Vell and Fila Vell as close runner-ups as well. First appearing in the 16th annual of The Amazing Spider-Man back in 1982, Monica was a lieutenant and captain of a cargo ship back in New Orleans, where she was exposed to extra-dimensional energy that gave her superpowers as a result. As you do in a superhero comic book universe. Said superpowers enable her to convert herself and transform into a physical form of light and energy, usually from the electromagnetic spectrum. So basically, she's like all the Lantern Corps combined into one. Pretty neat. As such, she had been referred to by the media as Captain Marvel. This was just several months after the death of Mar-Vell, the first Marvel Captain Marvel, from frigging cancer no less. And Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, suggests that she'd take on the name under the logic that, and I'm not kidding, he probably ain't the only thing in the world either. So, is he implying that either Thing T Thing from Addams Family, the Thing from Another World, and Mothra all likely exist in the Marvel Universe as well? I mean, Godzilla is technically canon to it, so I suppose why not Mothra? Nonetheless, soon Monica joins the Avengers for most of the 80s and was even leader of the team for quite a while, similar to how Storm led the X-Men roughly around the same time. Since then, while others came and went to take the captain rank, she had gone through a few other codenames of her own, like Photon, Pulsar, and Spectrum. But I think a lot of people enjoy and remember her best as Captain Marvel. In the MCU, she appeared as a child in the Captain Marvel film from 2019, and as an adult in the WandaVision TV series, while an alternate incarnation of her mother, Maria Rambeau, was Captain Marvel in the Multiverse of Madness, where she was eventually crushed by a statue. However, Monica is slated to return once more in The Marvels, alongside Carol Danvers and Kamala Khan. Hopefully, when that film comes about next year, fingers crossed, we could see Monica reclaim the Captain Marvel mantle, even though part of me wouldn't exactly hold my breath about it. At number 7 is Angela. Now, she's a pretty unique case to say the least, most of which because she wasn't created by Marvel for Marvel, but in fact in Image Comics, by one of my favorite writers, Neil Gaiman, the man behind Stardust, Coraline, American Gods, and The Sandman, among other works. Specifically for the Spawn comic series. In it, Angela is an angel in case you couldn't guess from her name, as well as a bounty hunter sent by Heaven to oppose Spawn, who was apparently spawn of the devil or something. So basically, she's like if Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life was a mercenary. Then, by the early 2000s and even in the 2010s, there had been something of a dispute, to say the least, between Neil Gaiman and Spawn's own creator and one of Image Comics' founders, Todd McFarlane, over who exactly really owned the character of Angela. Despite the point of Image Comics was that to have creator-owned characters and stories. Then again, this is the same company behind Youngblood, so make of that if you will. Anyways, by 2012, the court ruled out in Neil's favour, and he got back all legit ownership of Angela, only to sell her to Marvel about a year later in 2013. Irony or what? But there, she was properly integrated into the Marvel Universe proper during its Age of Ultron event, where her backstory would slightly be altered to better fit the lore. Here, it turns out that Angela is the daughter of the Norse god Odin, and therefore the long-lost sister of Thor and Loki, and her real name is Aldrif. I could make a kind of dandruff joke, but I also wonder if that was ever either in the prose or poetic Edda. Interesting retcon aside, she's still a pretty cool character, with a neat design, a cool amount of wit, and a decent range of skills in combat. Whether in Image or Marvel, Angela remains to be one angelic heroine. Pun may or may not be intended. At number 6 is a tie between Spider-Woman and Spider-UK. Now, when it comes to the Spider family and, to an extent, the Spider-Verse, not just the comics but also movies, TV shows, video games, and other media, having to pick a favourite iteration of the friendly neighbourhood web-slinger is no easy feat. While I could talk about some of my favourite versions of Peter Parker, I want to bring light to other characters. As such, I'm going with Jessica Drew and Billy Braddock, aka Spider-Woman and Spider-UK. Created by Marie Severin and Archie Goodwin in 1977 for the Marvel Spotlight series, a reason why the character of Spider-Woman was created in the first place was so that Marvel could keep a copyright on the name so no other company would take it first. Yeah, I'm not kidding with that. That's pretty much why they made her to begin with. Now you may think that she's just a gender-swapped version of Peter Parker with the exact same origin, backstory, powers, and everything. However, it's not entirely the case. In fact, it's been subject to a few retcons as well, so I'll try my best to skim it down as best as I could. From a young age, Jess had grown ill due to heavy exposure to uranium. And this is why you should never have your baby's cradle next to the thermonuclear reactor. And to cure and save her, her father injected her with irradiated spider blood, of course. And over time, she developed some spider-like powers of her own, climbing on walls, producing pheromones, and even producing green bioelectric bolts from her hands, which are dubbed venom blasts. They're not really all that venomous or anything, they just kind of hurt. As for Spider-UK, he was extensively an amalgamation of Spider-Man and Captain Britain, having generally the same powers and kind of spidery origin as the former, while having the British heritage of the latter. He was first introduced in the second issue of the storyline event Edge of Spider-Verse, all the way back in around 2014, and he would be killed about 4 years later in 2018 in the very first issue of the sequel event Spider-Geddon. Yeah. Which is pretty much a shame, because I think someone like him does deserve a spin-off series of his own, much like with Spider-Gwen and Silk. In fact, Spider-Woman even got an animated series back in 1978, which I'm sure some of you out there might be familiar with and even remember fondly. And I happen to enjoy both the mainstream Earth 616 incarnation as well as her alternate incarnation from Earth 1610. Hopefully these two will get better justice in the animated Spider-Verse sequels and perhaps a live-action film as well. I think Anya Taylor-Joy would be ideal as Jessica Drew. As for Billy Braddock, well, Peter Parker had been played by Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland, who are technically both English anyway, so I guess it'd be redundant in that case, if not ironic. At number 5, we have Wolverine. Oh yes, the man who's the best at whatever he does, even if whatever he does may not exactly be considered remotely nice. Whether in the comics, the classic 90s animated series, the live-action films, etc., Logan proves to be one bloody cool icon. Created by John Romita Jr., Roy Thomas, and Len Wein, each of which have created a dozen other characters in the Marvel Universe, Wolverine made his full debut in the 181st issue of The Incredible Hulk back in 1974, where he first confronted the giant green Avenger, before going on to becoming more associated with the X-Men due to his mutant origins as well as connections to the Weapon X program. And he would be portrayed by the likes of Steve Starscream Blum, Scott Dinobot McNeil, and Hugh John Valjean Jackman. Plus, with the X-Men likely to return to the silver screen sometime in the future with a potential film in the MCU, hopefully Wolverine will return to slash his retractable adamantium claws into our hearts. Figuratively, not literally. And who knows, maybe Hugh Jackman as Wolvie, Mark Ruffalo as Hulk, and Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool could unite in a live-action remake of Hulk vs. Wolverine. I mean, Disney really seem to like readapting their own animated films, even and especially when we don't even ask for such anyways. Why not do the same with an animated Marvel film as well? By the way, Hulk vs. Wolverine is underrated and you should check it out any way you can. Definitely the better 2009 Wolverine and Deadpool film than, well, X-Men Origins Wolverine, that's for bloody sure. Wolverine, the only embodiment of adamantium rage. Number 4 is Magneto. From one famous mutant to another, possibly one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe in fact, we have Magneto, the master of magnets. Bloody magnets, man. How do they even work? Well, I'll sum up to you how they work. They work for old Eric here. Appearing in the very first issue of the X-Men all the way back in 1963, he has pretty much been the most major villain and arch nemesis to the team of Merry Mutants, similar to Loki and the Avengers, which, funny enough, both the first issues of X-Men and Avengers were, as a fun fact, first released on the very same day, 2nd of July, 1963. No kidding with that, look it up. And he would even form his own team, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, alongside the Toad, the Mastermind, and his two kids, Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. Or at least they should be. Cheers a lot, MCU and Fox and movie rights. But hey, with Patrick Stewart reappearing as Professor X in Multiverse of Madness, maybe we'll get to see Ian McKellen reprise his role as well as Magneto in the future, right? Right? At number 3 is Blade. Oh yes, that Blade. For those who may not even know or even heard of him, imagine Shaft if he were a vampire hunter. And in case you don't know who Shaft is either, he's a vampire slayer as well as a daywalker, having some vampiric abilities while not having much of their weaknesses. Another creation from the mind of Marv Wolfman, Blade started out as a supporting character in the pages of Marvel's Tomb of Dracula, before eventually becoming a main protagonist in his own right. Plus, his films from 1998 to 2004 would really set off the ongoing stream of Marvel's various film adaptations. X-Men, Spiderman, Iron Man, and so on and so forth. And it was for a character who was created just for a mere comic about the famous vampire. And of course, with a new Blade film announced for 2023, in time for the 25th anniversary of the first film, being set in the MCU, fingers crossed that they'll do him justice there. Otherwise, those mother buggers are going to have to be ice skating uphill. At number 2, we have yet another tie with Captain Britain and Psylocke. Yes, another tie here, and it's for the twin brother and sister, Brian and Betsy Braddock. Introduced in the Captain Britain comic series back in 1978 by writer Chris Claremont and artist Herb Trimpe, Brian was made as a British alternative to the American Steve Rogers, which may seem a bit cheap to some, but as a Brit myself, I don't want to care about whatever others may say. We go and have our own captain, and we should be proud of that. Similar to the whole Spider-Verse thing, there's also the Captain Britain Corps, a vast team consisting of a particular version of Captain Britain from each and every universe in the multiverse, which Spider UK also happens to be one of the younger and newer members of. As for the Psylocke Betsy, much like with Wolverine, she would come to be more affiliated with the X-Men, with her powers of telepathy, telekinesis, psychokinesis, precognition, and forming glowing psychic blades would be explained to be of mutant origin. And she'd even body swapped with another mutant named Quanon, where mostly remained that way for nearly 30 years before returning to their true respective bodies. And she even made a few appearances in X-Men Last Stand and Apocalypse, aka 2 of the weaker X-Men films. That has got to be embarrassing. While it's mostly unlikely that either would be in the MCU in a film or TV series, Cap Brit and Psylocke definitely deserve a new chance and a boost in popularity. We Brits need our own superheroes, and the two better be played by actual Brits, otherwise there'd be riots. On Twitter. Before I get to number 1, I like to get out there several honourable mentions, which, let me tell you, there have been a lot, because this has been quite not exactly an easy list to get down. First, the Ant-Man and the Wasp. Out of the very first and original founders of the Avengers, the tiny duo are definitely the most underrated, not even getting a chance in the first Avengers film with Hulk, Iron Man, and Thor, though it seems with the later MCU films and the upcoming Quantumania sequel, they're starting to get some better exposure. Big Hero 6, possibly the only instance so far of Disney actually adapting a Marvel comic into a canon animated feature. They're an interesting range of characters that even got their own animated TV series on Disney XD channel, plus a spin-off about Baymax recently on Disney+. Bullseye, tied with Carnage and Green Goblin as being the closest to being considered the Joker of Marvel Comics, Bullseye is my favourite of Daredevil's rogues, with his striking design, mysterious origin, and just all-around eerie personality. He definitely deserves his own movie similar to Joker. Doctor Doom and Galactus, definitely among the most powerful of Marvel's villains, and definitely among the most iconic, predating even the likes of Loki, Doc Ock, and Thanos. Excalibur, not just the offshoot X-Men group, but also the individual known as Faiza Hussein, or as I would like to call her, Kamala Khan done right. She was created and introduced in the Captain Britain and MI13 series back in 2008 as its POV or point of view character, and she would earn the sword of the same name. Gwenpool, possibly one of the cutest and adorable superheroes in Marvel's recent lineup alone, with her sweet demeanor, self-awareness, snarkiness, abilities to actually break through the comic book dimensions and out of her real world and into the comic book world, as well as Guri Hiru's vibrant and colourful art style. I would like to see a film of hers, combining the dimension-hopping aspects of Into the Spider-Verse with the fourth wall breaks and anarchic humour of the Deadpool movies. Iron Man. 3 words. Robert Downey Jr. That's all I've got to say there. Union Jack and Lionheart. Any superheroes with those codenames definitely need and deserve more exposure and their own MCU series. Marvel Girl, aka Jean Grey. one of the original 5 members of the X-Men, Jean has had some development for over the years, especially with the Dark Phoenix saga. So much so that a freaking animated TLDR short did it better justice than 2 live-action movies. Gotta be a bad sign. And lastly, Mr. Fantastic, the leader of the Fantastic Four. One of the most smartest individuals in the Marvel Universe, and possibly one of the more famous examples of an autistic superhero in comics. I and many other people could relate to that, having some level of intellect while not being the most social. And some have said Marvel superheroes are characters you can relate to. And finally, at number 1, my absolute favourite Marvel super character is Marvel Man, aka Miracle Man. Now, I guarantee someone out there might be thinking, what? This is your favourite Marvel character? He's not Marvel, he's not owned by Marvel, he's not even made by Marvel. And yada yada yada. And well, you'd be right in that he wasn't created in or by Marvel, but he is currently owned by Marvel Comics, and Marvel is in his friggin' name. Plus, to give a bit of history to those who haven't heard of Marvel Man, which I imagine would be a lot, here's the gist. In 1940, Fawcett Comics created the very original Captain Marvel, Billy Batson, among many other superheroes and companies in the wake of Superman, Batman, and the like. Soon enough, the Big Red Cheese comics became massive successes, even outselling the Man of Steel himself. And likely because of this seeming threat, DC, then known as National Publishing, brought Fawcett into court with accusations of copyright infringement due to Captain Marvel being too similar to Superman. Needless to say, DC won out, and Fawcett would go out of business, and all their characters and IPs would be taken in by DC. Meanwhile, in 1953, L. Miller & Son, the publisher that had imported black and white Captain Marvel reprints to over here in the UK, had writer Mick Anglo come up with a thin pastiche of Captain Marvel called Marvel Man, which honestly sounds and even looks more like Superman than the Captain himself. Instead of saying Shazam, he says Komodo, which is atomic spelled backwards with a K for some reason. Some of his supporting sidekicks, like Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel, would become Young Marvel Man and Kid Marvel Man, and even a few villains like Black Adam would become Young Nasty Man. Subtle. But by the early 60s, Marvel Man would fade out of the limelight until about 20 years later when Eclipse Comics and a very young Alan Moore saw a chance to revive the character in a deconstruction similar to what he would do with Watchmen and the Ballad of Halo Jones. Then, out of fear of Marvel Comics suing, Eclipse had the character and superhero be renamed to Miracle Man. Not too bad a change, to be honest. Still fits and has generally the same meaning behind it. And soon, Alan would pass the torch to Neil Gaiman to continue the story. And, like with Angela in 2013, Marvel Comics would buy the full rights to the Man of Miracles, where he resides for better or worse to this day. So, why do I see him as my favourite Marvel character? Well, aside from him being a British Captain Marvel, and hey, I'm a Brit, I love British characters, but he does have an important part in the modernising of superhero comic books and comic book superheroes. Bear in mind, back in 1982, the Bronze Age of comic books was in its final years, and 1985 would mark the beginning of the modern age of comic books, with titles such as Watchmen, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and The Dark Knight Returns, among many others. Like with Superman, like with Captain Marvel, or any superhero for that matter, Marvel Man, or Miracle Man, has so much power, yet that doesn't nor shouldn't prevent him from using such for acts of kindness and charity. Superheroes and supervillains are often compared to gods and knights errant and alike, but many of them are and can still be human, figuratively or literally. In the same way normal people are capable of committing either good or evil, superpowered beings are capable of either as well. Absolute power may corrupt, but corruption can still be resisted. And I think that can be a lesson that can be learned from Marvel Man. And that's just pretty much one reason why he's not only one of my favorite Marvel characters, but one of my favorite superheroes in general. And that seems to be it for this marvelous top list of mine. And it might have taken longer than I initially intended it to be. Next time, we go from Marvel to fellow big superhero comic book company DC with a top list of my favorite characters from their universe.